We have a mature cataract. We are not sure of how hard the cataract is. We start once again with a side port incision both to the left and to the right. And in this particular case, we are going to replace the xylocaine in the anterior chamber with an air bubble and use vision blue dye in order to stain the anterior capsule so that we can better visualize the capsular flap as we tear a continuous curvilinear capsulorhexis. After the installation of the vision blue dye, we will displace the air bubble by the injection of viscoelastic. Some residual air bubbles will be evacuated then by aspiration after the viscoelastic is placed into the anterior chamber. We are now in a position to create our 2.5 millimeter phacoemulsification incision using a 3D blade, and utilizing the Rhine capsulorhexis forceps, we will tear a continuous curvilinear capsulorhexis. We don't know how hard the lens is, but because we are not getting much in the way of cortex fluffing up into the anterior chamber, we make the assumption that the lens is going to be hard, and as a result, we are going to make a larger than usual capsulorhexis to facilitate phacoemulsification of what we assume will be a rather dense cataract. And the ease with which this is accomplished utilizing vision blue is quite evident. The absence of the red reflex is not a hindrance at all because of the great visualization of the capsular flap, and the torn part of the capsule is quite readily evident by the white appearance of the cataract under it. Following the completion of the continuous curvilinear capsulorhexis, cortical cleaving hydrodissection will be performed. There is a great tendency, of course, because of the large size of the capsulorhexis, for the lens to come out of the bag. We control it with the cannula, and then, in spite of the firmness of the lens, do hydrodelineation as well. We're going to use a bevel down technique with power modulations set at linear power and 2 pulses per second, and we will chop the cataract into multiple pieces before we start to actually extract those pieces. And we can see we start with stabilization of the lens utilizing the chop instrument, and the initial chop is performed dividing the nucleus into half or into asymmetric pieces. We will chop it again and utilizing the handpiece break it into several pieces, controlling the nucleus with the second handpiece and keeping it from coming up into the anterior chamber in such a way as to threaten the integrity of the cornea. Once again, multiple passes with the chop instrument allow us to chop it into several pie-shaped segments, after which we will start to evacuate those segments using pulsed phacoemulsification with linear power. Pulsed phacoemulsification gives us an ability to generally keep the phaco tip occluded because of the intermittent cessation of the vibration of the tip at the continuous presence of vacuum. And once again, we utilize the second handpiece to keep material away from the corneal endothelium, and we can see evacuation of the chopped segments of the nucleus taking place with relative ease. Our average power here is going to be in single digits. Our vacuum is going to be 500 millimeters of mercury. And we can see that we do indeed have a softer epinuclear shell persisting as the hard portions of the nucleus are evacuated. We will see that in spite of the firmness of this nucleus, there was indeed an epinuclear shell, which will be evacuated almost as one single piece. And here we can see the epinucleus flipping and coming out of the eye. The epinucleus was indeed relatively soft in spite of the firmness of the white cataract. This white cataract was not rock hard, obviously, but we were able to remove it with very low amounts of power, utilizing mostly high vacuum and the mechanical forces of chopping. Once again, we will clear chips that tend to aggregate at the side port incision or in the subincisional space, after which we will use a dispersive viscoelastic to visco-dissect the residual cortex into the capsular fornices, and then we will displace that dispersive viscoelastic, which is hard to mobilize, with a cohesive viscoelastic which is injected into the capsular bag under the dispersive viscoelastic, which is then forced anteriorly, residual cortex being displaced further into the capsular fornices as we do this. We will now implant a star 6.3 millimeter optic foldable silicone IOL with polyamide loops. This is an AQ 2050 IOL. Because of the large size of the eye and the low power ranges this lens is available in. And here we can see that the trailing haptic is dialed into the capsular bag with ease. We will now use the bimanual irrigation aspiration handpiece to once again remove residual cortex at the time we remove residual viscoelastics. Once again, the parameters for the use of the bimanual handpiece is a bottle height of 95 inches from the bottom of the bottle to the floor, a flow rate of 18 cc's per minute, and a vacuum of 550 millimeters of mercury. And we can see the relative ease with which we can remove residual cortex, approaching the hard pieces with the irrigation port so they can be crushed and manipulated into the aspiration port. And then once the distal portions of the bag have been approached with the aspiration handpiece, we will exchange the handpieces and come into the eye with the aspiration handpiece from the opposite side, accessing the residual cortex in the right portion, the right-hand portions of the capsular bag. Once again, demonstrating the stability of the chamber and the ability to maintain tautness of the capsular bag because of the specific dimensions of our aspiration irrigation handpiece and the parameters that we use. We can again polish the anterior capsular flap or any portion of the posterior capsule that's necessary by using the abraded, roughened handpiece, which we have not chosen to use in this instance because of the lack of necessity to do that. And here subincisional residual cortex is evacuated, and in a relatively rapid manner, utilizing this bimanual system, we have cleared the cortex.